The kit I just unboxed is called the DJI FPV Combo, and it includes everything you see right here in front of me on the table, which is pretty much everything you need to fly this drone right out of the box. Now, I'm sure that DJI is going to release other kits with various combinations of these components later on, but for today I'd like to focus on the FPV Combo because everything you need to get this drone up in the air is included with this kit. Now, inside the kit, you'll find three main components: the FPV goggles, these are the version 2 of the digital goggles, the brand new FPV drone, and the new controller, and a whole lot of other accessories you'll use with these three components to get this drone airborne. Inside the kit, you'll find 4 antennae, which screw onto these antenna studs on the goggles, a strap to hold it on your head, a battery for the goggles, power button on this end, USB-C connection on this end, and this is all the power you'll need to operate those goggles. You'll also find a power cord, which has a barrel connection on this end, which plugs into the goggles, and a USB-C on this end, which actually plugs into the port on the battery. You'll also find an adapter cable. This plugs into the goggles and allows you to connect your phone up to this end of it. So this end is a USB-C that plugs into the goggles. This end has a female USB-A on it, and you'll use the cable from your phone to plug it in here, and then run the DJI Fly app on your phone and connect this up to the goggles. You'll also find a power brick that's used to charge the battery in the drone with this specialized connector. It also has 2 full-size USB-A ports on it that you can use with the included cables to charge this battery and charge the controller. You'll find an AC cord for the power brick. This is just a standard plug here that'll plug into any standard wall outlet with a dual prong on the other end to plug into the brick. And you'll find another cable here, which is a USB-A on this end and a USB-C on the other end. And again, this can be used to charge the battery or can be used to charge the controller. I think it's really nice that they include all these extra cables because even though you may have a couple of cables at home, having a heavy duty cable like this in the kit means you can keep it all together and you always have the parts you need to charge up your quad. All right, you also get 4 propellers that are red here and 4 propellers that aren't red here, and that gives you a set of propellers for the quad and a spare set of propellers just in case you crash it. You'll find a replacement hood, and this is really nice because it allows you to personalize your drone, especially if you're flying with somebody else. It's easy to tell the difference between them. You'll find the controller, a spare set of joysticks, an Allen wrench, and I wondered what that was for initially, and if you look closely on the quad, you'll see there are Allen screws right here that allow you to take the hood off, and if you have to do repairs, you can actually use it to loosen up the hood. It's also used with the controller because when you move into manual mode, you don't want to have the spring-loaded joysticks. Any FPV flyer out there will tell you that they want the joysticks loose so they can move them as they need to, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute, but underneath you can actually pull the rubber pads off the bottom and adjust the joysticks so they don't have that spring action in there. And you'll find 2 manuals, a quick start guide, and a warranty and safety guidelines that talk about how to charge the batteries and how to protect your drone and all the good things you need to do to keep your drone in the best shape possible. Now, if you stay tuned, next I'll take a closer look at the goggles and its accessories, the drone and its accessories, and the controller. Now I'll take a closer look at the DJI FPV Quad. And the first thing you'll probably notice is the tri-blade design. Now, this is fairly new for DJI, but it's really common on other FPV drones, but it does look like DJI's modified the end of these propellers slightly to incorporate some of their high efficiency, low noise technology that they originally pioneered on the Mavic product. So we'll have to see how that affects the efficiency and the noise level when we're flying. Now, as I'd mentioned, there are 2 different styles of propellers. One set has red markings on the top of it, and the other one has no markings on the top. And it's really important you match up the one with red marking on a motor with red marking, and again, these should be across from each other, and the ones with no marking on a motor with no marking, and they'll be across from each other. And the way you change those props, you'll hold the base, push down on the prop, and spin the base, and it'll actually pop off the base. And then you can pull it off, put a new prop on there, and this spring is really substantial. So you want to line up those slots, push down on it gently, don't wrestle with it too much, and spin it, and it'll lock in place. And when it locks, you know you've really got it down there, and that's important because this thing's whipping through the air, so you want those props to stay where you put them. On the top of the quad, you'll see a plastic hood up here, electronics underneath there, and if you want to remove that to replace it with the green one that comes with the kit, and again, if you're flying with somebody or you're racing, you may want to change this out, or maybe just want to make your quad look a little cooler, you can actually swap it out for the green one. And the way you'll do that is to use the included Allen wrench, and you can loosen these 2 bolts here, these 2 bolts, 2 more on this side and 2 more on the other side. This pops off, you can pop this one on, put the bolts back in, and you're good to go. Now, you'll notice a heat sink on the back, and it feels aluminum there, and that's a pretty substantial heat sink because I imagine it generates a lot of heat when it's flying, and there's ventilation on the front to pull cool air across that electronic section inside there and out the back, and they've actually cut channels into the heat sink here to direct the airflow to the sides and back so that it's spreading the heat out as it comes out the back of the quad, so pretty cool there. Now let's take a look at the battery next. Pretty substantial battery back here, and you'll notice the connection up top. So to remove the battery, you'll pull this out first, just wiggle it out, And then to release the battery, there are two latches, one here and one on the other side. You pull back on those, and the battery slides out of the unit. Now, what's different about this, a couple of things. Number one, it's gigantic compared to the quad. As I said, I think it's a quarter or a third the size and weight of the quad. And to slide it back in, you'll line up the channel, slide it in the quad, and when you push in, you'll hear it click closed. Another thing that's different is with most DJI quads, the connections for the batteries are on the front. So when you slide it in, you're actually making the connection. Here you mount it first, and you make the connection up top by plugging this back in right there, and then that connection's in. Intelligent flight battery, it's going to control how it's discharged and how it's charged when you're charging it. All right, so let's take a look at the bottom of the quad next. I want to show you some of the sensors. So they built in a couple of protection sensors. You've got optical sensors here and infrared sensors there. So they have both time of flight and VIO sensors built in. You'll notice a landing light right there. And then there are two more sensors, optical sensors on the front. So it has a level of crash avoidance where if it's approaching something in certain flight modes, it'll actually slow down so it doesn't crash into something. So it gives you a couple of seconds to adjust. Now, you'll also notice a little door right here underneath. You pop that open, what you'll find inside there is a micro SD card slot right there for recording, so you can pop a micro SD card in, record right from the drone. To the left of that is a USB-C connection, and that can be used with a cable to connect to your computer to push firmware to it using the DJI Assistant, or if you need to move those files off the SD card, connect it to your computer and you can transfer them that way. I like to pop the SD card out and use an adapter. It's a lot faster, I think, than transferring it over that connection. All right, let's take a look at the camera next. There's a gimbal lock and protector on the front, and it would look like you just squeeze on the sides and pull it off, but you can't because the motor's over here. So you'll put your thumb underneath and gently pry it off like that. Now, I promise you that cracking noise isn't something that's breaking with it. It is kind of unsettling when you do it, but it makes that noise every time I pulled it off. And then inside there, you'll find the camera, again, a 4K camera, and a single-axis gimbal. Now, I'd mentioned before that it can't have a 3-axis gimbal because the quad, when it's flying, is making all kinds of really radical movements. It's starting, it's stopping, it's banking real hard. It's hard for a 3-axis gimbal to keep up with that. So you've got a stabilized gimbal with electronic image stabilization built in and a single-axis movement in this direction so you can move the camera up and down as you're flying. So that's pretty cool. Then the last thing I wanted to mention was to put this back on, you've got to be a little bit gentle. The way I found it works best is to line the camera up with the gimbal guard like this. I don't get it yet. There we go. Plug in the top and then gently close the bottom and you'll hear a click, and that's pretty much it. And that's all there is to it. There's a couple of indicator lights on the back, a couple of lights along here, which is nice. On the front, you've got indicator lights on here, and you've got indicator lights on the back over here. So when you're flying this thing, I mean, you've got plenty of lights up in the sky, and it's easy to see it, and all those indicator lights really help, as well as the landing light in the bottom. So when you're coming down, you can turn on the landing light, or put it in automatic mode. I guess it'll turn on when you're landing. And that's pretty much it for the quad. Now I'll take a closer look at the FPV goggles, and there's some components that are included with the kit that work with the goggles, so I'll explain what they do as well. And I'll start with the antenna. I mentioned there are 4 antennae included with the kit, and you'll have to install those on the goggles before you can use them. And the way you do that is just line up the threads with the antenna post and spin them on gently, and then finger tighten them down. Don't crank down on these because you can crack the connection underneath. The other thing I want to point out is that there's a lot of torque on these. So if you throw these in a backpack and something bangs up against these, there's a good chance you can crack the board underneath. So my recommendation is when you're going to fly, put them on. When you're done for the day, pull them off, put them in your bag, and you'll be good to go. There's also a strap included that holds this to your head. It's a 3-point attachment, and you want to make sure that you line up the long strap with the top buckle and the shorter straps with the side buckles. And if you forget, like me, you can look at the DJI logo, point that at the goggles, and you'll be lined up perfectly. And this has got a lot of adjustments, so you can adjust it to make it comfortable on your head. You'll also find a battery included with the kit, and this is a very specialized battery that should only be used with the goggles. As a port you can use for charging it. That. You can use any standard USB-C cable, but it's nice to include one with the kit. It takes about 2 hours, 2.5 hours to fully charge the controller if it's really depleted, and then you'll get a lot of flying time out of it. You'll also find 2 little spots here where you can hide the joysticks when you put this away for the afternoon. These joysticks come off, and I'm not a fan of pulling the joysticks off because I have really fumbly fingers, and a lot of times I'll take them off, try to put them back on, and I'll drop them in tall grass and then spend the next 2 hours trying to find them. So I leave them on all the time, but if you'd like to take them off, you can pop them in down here. If you do lose them, and I will lose them, I've got 2 extras that come with the kit, so it's nice to know I've got extra ones in case I do lose them. All right, on the top, this is the antenna. Right now it's in the stored position, so when you put it away for the day, that's what it should look like. When you're flying, you want to flip this up. And you want this end of it to face the quad. So you want to make sure you try to zero in on where that quad is in the air, and that's the antenna. It'll actually broadcast downfield. On the back, there's a lot of different buttons. Probably the most important button on this remote controller, I call it the emergency stop button. It's a halt and hover button, which means when you're flying the quad and you get into trouble where you're getting close to a tree or you're a little bit afraid of what's going on, you can tap that. The quad will immediately halt in midair and hover wherever it is. And then you can take control over it again. It's also a double function button because you see that little circle with the H in it? If you hold this button, it'll trigger a return to home. So if you're lost out there somewhere in the wilderness and can't find your quad, hold that. It'll return to home and land pretty much where it took off. Right here is your mode selection button. I've got it in normal mode now. The middle is sport mode. And the bottom is manual mode, which is the full-on FPV mode. So normal, it'll fly pretty much like a Mavic. In the middle, it'll fly like a hybrid, somewhere between a Mavic and an FPV. And all the way down is in manual mode, where it'll fly like an actual FPV. Now, the thing is, they're really cautious about going into manual mode, so just flipping it into manual mode won't actually allow you to fly it at 87 miles an hour. You actually have to unlock it, and you do that by hitting this button. So to get into manual mode, you've got to click down, hit this button, and then it'll go into manual mode. On this side, you're going to find a 3-position rocker that's programmable as well. So in addition to the C1, you can program all 3 of these settings on this side in the software. To the right of that is the picture and video recording button. So you can switch between the two, and that'll actually start the recording or it'll take a picture. And down here is the gimbal control, where you can tilt the gimbal up and down on that quad. Now, if you want to change the joysticks from the spring-loaded like I've got to more of an FPV model, you can see there are 2 little arrows right here that tell you you can peel these back. I don't know if I can do it with my fingernails or not. I might need to use this because it's what I'm going to adjust it with. So you can get the Allen wrench underneath there and actually peel this back a little bit. And then once it's open, there are 2 adjustments right here, F1 and F2. And what you'll do is put this down and you'll loosen one of them and then loosen the other one. One controls the tension of how that joystick moves. The other one takes the spring loading off of it. And once you've made that adjustment, you can close it up like this, snap it back in, and you're ready to start flying. So you don't have to do that adjustment that often, but if you're flying FPV all the time, you'll probably leave it in FPV mode, which means the joysticks will come down and stay there. But if you're flying it like a regular quad, when you first start flying the FPV drone, you might want to leave it with the center position, spring load it like that so it returns to center. And that's pretty much all you need to know about the controller.